the economics that you've asked about. The Department of Homeland Security says there's somewhere between 10 and 12 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. So as an economist, let me make one thing clear. We are a rich country of 330 million people. The economic problems we have, which are severe, could not ever have been caused by 10 to 12 of the poorest people on the planet. The notion that the immigrants are a cause of the problems we face is stone cold ridiculous. It may be a clever scapegoating, it may work to get you votes, but it has nothing to do with reality. Number two, there are certain industries that concentrate undocumented immigrants. Agriculture is a big one. The restaurant business is a big one. Yes. Construction is another big one. And then there's a whole host of other industries, but those are the big ones. In those industries, undocumented immigrants are a major part of the labor force. Not only that, they are a more important cause of the profitability in those industries than their mere numbers would tell you. Why? Because an undocumented immigrant can be and is regularly abused by the employer. Yes. For the obvious reason, which if you have any contact with these folks, they'll tell you 10 different stories. I've heard them all. It's Friday afternoon. Everybody's going to pick up their check at the front office before they go home. Jose arrives. He stands in line, waits for his check. The boss says, Jose, we've had a terrible week. We didn't make the money. I can't pay you this week. But if you come back next week, I can be sure to pay you. What is Jose going to do? Answer, nothing. He dare not go to any government office, right? Because he's an undocumented. He can't show a paper. He can't show a residence allowance, nothing. He's terrified of going anywhere near the labor office. There's nothing he can do. And the employer knows it. The employers look for these people because of this. And I'm not going to take your time and mine to talk about the abuse, sexual and other, that this situation invites in all the ways you don't need me to tell you about. Okay, now let's imagine you deport them. First of all, that costs billions, because you're talking about 10 to 12 million people. You have to house them, you have to move them, you have to feed them in the process, you have to deal with the umpteen million lawsuits that will immediately crop up around all of this. This is going to take time and it's going to cost personnel and it's going to be an immense expense. But that's the least of it. Here comes the big one. Every one of those industries is a crucial player in the inflation level of the United States. Who's going to pick the lettuce? Who's going to pick the fruit? Who's going to do all that work? Who's going to clean the dishes in the back of the restaurant? Who's going to clean up at the end, the evening when the patrons of the restaurant go home? Well, the answer is you either close the restaurant, and that has economic consequences, or you close the farms, and that's really not an option, or you're going to have to hire Americans. And Americans won't be afraid to go to the labor office if you don't pay them. So you're going to actually have to pay them. And you're probably going to have to pay them a good bit more than the immigrant for all the reasons you normally pay immigrants less than native workers, which means the cost structure of these industries is going to take off. And you know what they're all going to do, those employers? They're going to raise their prices. They're going to want to do that to recapture the extra costs that will come. And the government has not proposed anything that will substitute here.
Okay, so, what if I told you deporting undocumented immigrants could actually totally backfire on the economy?
Interesting.
Not just, a little bit, but, really make prices for, everyday stuff just go crazy, way up. That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Oh, wow.
It's wild. We're going deep on this economist, Richard Wolff.
Okay.
And this is all based on an interview he did with the Real News Network. You can find it on YouTube.
Oh, cool.
But he basically like just straight up says that this whole idea that undocumented immigrants are like the cause of economic problems is ridiculous.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back. He calls it like stone cold ridiculous.
Right.
And he points out that they're actually a really small part of the whole U.S. population. And a lot of times, they're not doing so well financially themselves.
Yeah, it's crazy because when you like actually think about it, this idea that immigrants are stealing jobs or making wages go down, it just doesn't like hold up.
It really doesn't. And that's actually where Wolf gets into how important undocumented immigrants are to some of the, the biggest industries in the U.S.,
Right.
like agriculture, restaurants, construction, like the backbone of the economy in many ways.
Yeah, for sure. It's not even just about filling jobs either. He says these industries really need this specific workforce or they won't be profitable.
Exactly. And that kind of like creates this weird power dynamic between the employers and the undocumented workers, which Wolf illustrates with this story about a worker named Jose.
Oh, okay.
Jose works all week, right? And then it's payday, and his boss is basically like, tough luck, we didn't make enough money, no paycheck.
Oh, man. That's rough. I mean, what can Jose even do about that?
That's exactly what Wolf is getting at. He's totally stuck. I mean, can he go to the labor board? Can he, like, file a complaint? Not without risking being deported.
So it's like he has to choose between being taken advantage of or losing his job and, like, maybe even getting sent back to a dangerous place.
Yeah. It's a really tough situation that I think a lot of people don't even realize is happening.
And this is why his argument about mass deportation is so scary.
Yeah, because suddenly you're talking about getting rid of, like, a huge part of the workers in all these industries we depend on.
Right. And that's where Wolf's whole inflation bomb thing comes in.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
That one really, like, made me think.
Yeah, it's super vivid. Like, imagine if your grocery bill was suddenly, like, 20% higher, or the cost of, building a house just exploded. What if eating at a restaurant became something only rich people could afford?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's the kind of impact we could be talking about, because those employers would have to hire American workers at, like, way higher wages just to fill all those empty spots.
Yeah.
And guess who ends up paying for that?
Us, the people buying stuff.
Mm.
So, ironically, people who are worried about inflation might actually see it get worse because of policies like mass deportation.
It's like, using gasoline to put out a fire. It just makes things worse.
And this leads to another point Wolf makes, which is the potential for, like, a huge political backlash.
Right. He's saying this kind of policy could cause so much chaos in the economy that future politicians would basically have to, like, scramble to undo it just to calm things down.
Right.
It could create its own opposition.
Wow. So, like, a policy that's supposed to be about helping the economy could actually make things so much worse. So it makes you wonder, what are they really trying to do with a policy like that?
Yeah. I mean, it really highlights how important it is to look past, like, the slogans and actually understand what the results might be before we make such big changes.
Totally. It's not as easy as just saying, get rid of all the undocumented immigrants and everything will be perfect.
It's way more complicated than that.
Way more.
And, speaking of complicated, Wolf kind of throws in this other idea, maybe robots could fill the gap if all the workers get deported.
Oh.
He talks about, like, automation, maybe taking over jobs, like picking our food, cooking and building houses.
That's a whole other, like, can of worms.
Yeah, for sure. What about all the American workers who might lose their jobs to robots? And who's in charge of all those robots? Who benefits from their work?
It seems like we'd just be, like, trading one problem for another.
Exactly. But it's definitely interesting to think about, and it raises some important questions about what jobs will look like in the future in this country.
It does. It really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at this, like, crossroads where we're either going to see a ton of problems from not having enough workers, or we're going to have to figure out what it means to have robots doing most of the jobs.
It's a big moment, for sure. And you know what I find so interesting about Wolf's take on this is that he really emphasizes, like, the human side of this whole debate.
Yeah, totally. He's not just talking about, numbers and statistics. He's talking about how those numbers affect real people's lives.
Exactly. He brings it back to stories like that one about Jose,
Yeah.
It reminds us that there are actual people who would really suffer if these policies happen.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, why are people pushing for mass deportation so much? If it's not really about making the economy better, it could actually make things worse. What's the point?
It's a good question. Is it about, trying to appeal to a certain group of voters? Or is there maybe, like, a deeper political strategy going on that we don't see?
It just seems like there's this disconnect between what some politicians are saying and what the actual economic facts are. Like this idea that kicking out millions of people will magically fix everything just doesn't make sense when you look at it closely.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that economics isn't like a game where someone has to lose for someone else to win. You know, a good economy is good for everybody, and that includes immigrants.
It's like if you're baking a cake right, you need all the ingredients for it to turn out right. You can't just like take out the flour and expect it to taste good.
Exactly. And when we make policies that try to shut out whole groups of people, we all end up worse off in the end.
And it's not even just about the money, right? We have to think about like the social and cultural parts of our country too. What does it say about us when we turn away from people who've done so much to help our communities?
It makes you think about our values as a nation. Are we a country that's welcoming and inclusive? Or are we a country that's scared and divided?
These are choices we're making not just as a country, but as individuals too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do we talk about these things with, empathy and understanding? How do we push back against fake news and support policies that actually reflect what we believe in?
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in all the big ideas about, the economy and policy, but we can't forget that real people are at the center of this whole thing.
It's those real stories that make this issue hit home, right? Behind all the statistics and predictions, there are people with families and hopes and dreams.
People who matter and whose voices deserve to be heard.
So, like, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? What can we do as individuals to actually make a difference?
Well, knowing stuff is powerful, right? The first thing is to educate ourselves, to understand how complicated this is, and to be able to explain what might happen if we make different choices.
The more we understand, the better we can have real conversations, talk to our elected officials, and push for change.
Exactly. We can support groups that are fighting for immigrant rights, challenge policies that are unfair, and work towards economic justice for everybody.
We can also be smart about where we spend our money. We can support businesses that treat their workers well and try to make our own communities more ethical and sustainable.
Those things might seem small when you're just one person, but they're definitely moving in the right direction. And when we combine those individual actions with bigger efforts, we can make a real difference in the long run.
What I'm getting from this deep dive is that this whole immigration thing is so much bigger than just the economy. It's about who we are as a society, what we believe in our sense of fairness, and how committed we are to making a world that's just and equal for everybody.
That's a really insightful point. It reminds us that we're all connected, and the choices we make every day can really shape the future we build together.
I don't know about you, but I keep thinking about that whole inflation bomb idea.
Yeah.
It really shows how, trying to deport a bunch of people could totally blow up in our faces and affect everyone.
It's a pretty powerful way to put it. And it makes you realize, the people who want these policies, who are often worried about the economy, might actually be the ones who get hurt the most.
It's like they're being told this is a quick fix, but it could backfire and just make the problems they're worried about even worse.
You're right. And I think it points to this bigger issue of trying to make things too simple. Complicated stuff like immigration can't just be boiled down to slogans and easy answers.
We need to actually talk about all the different sides and understand that our economy and our society are all connected.
Exactly. It's not like a game of Jenga where you can just pull out a piece and expect the whole thing to stay up.
Yeah, because the truth is our economy, our whole society, it's built on everyone depending on each other.
And trying to force out a big part of that, like with mass deportation, would definitely have huge consequences.
It's been really, eye-opening to dig into all this economic stuff about immigration and to see how these simple solutions just fall apart when you look at them closely.
Well, hopefully this deep dive has given you a new way to think about all of this, and maybe even made you ask some questions of your own.
Oh, it definitely has for me. And it's clear there's not one easy answer here.
Yeah, there really isn't. And that's exactly why it's so important to talk about it, to question what we think we know, and to really think about the choices we make, both individually and as a whole society.
Before we finish up, I wanted to go back to something Wolff said that really got me thinking. What if automation does become the answer to labor shortages? What would that world even look like?
It's an interesting question. It makes you think about the good and bad things about a society that relies more and more on machines.
Yeah, who wins in that kind of future? Who gets left behind? And what does work even mean anymore?
These are all questions we need to be asking ourselves as we move forward, and we hope this deep dive has given you the information and insights to start asking those tough questions.
So thanks for joining us as we explored these really fascinating and often surprising economic arguments about immigration. And remember, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper. We'll see you next time.